Right, we're rolling. On this podcast, we'll be talking about different areas of business and all things marketing. My name is Dave Doyle.
And I'm Dave Alton. This is Social Antics, another marketing podcast.
This week on Social Antics, we are delighted to be joined by Stephen Moraine. Stephen's well known around Cork and Ireland for his work with Red FM, one of Europe's biggest and best tourist attractions, Fota wildlife, and recently with his work with Narration and 24 Stories. Stephen, welcome to Social Antics. How are you keeping?
Not too bad, Dave. And to the two Daves here in this case, I'm good. Yourselves?
Good. We haven't come up with a system yet, so we'll try and figure out who you're talking to.
Oh yeah, okay.
How have things been anyway over I suppose 12 months? I suppose we haven't really seen you since then with all the lockdowns. How have you been keeping?
I'm not doing too bad. Look, there's this. I have a coffee in my hand. It's actually Velo coffee, so it's kind of like product placement here, and just good stuff. And plenty of that keep me going because with the amount of Zoom calls, and you might notice there, obviously for the people listening to the podcast, they won't see it, but I've blue tinges on my glasses. I had to get new glasses last week because I've spent so much time on screens in the last 12 months that my eyes have deteriorated just from screen time. They're more tired than anything else. So that's kind of first world problems, but yeah, it's all been about digital, I suppose, in the last 12 months, and it will be for the foreseeable future. It looks like as well, and maybe we'll see this whole idea of a blended world and when things come back to normal, because I think there's a part of me has got used to some of this as well,
I wonder with that though is that I think it's going to eventually go that way. But I'm wondering, in the initial few months, are people just going to go on a complete digital detax and just go, I'm not doing a Zoom meeting, I'm meeting people for coffees, I'm not watching films, I'm going to the pub, I'm going to matches. Because I think, like yourself though, like my eyesight wasn't great to begin with. And I was meant to get glasses at the very start of the first lockdown. And I just haven't got them, just purely on the basis that, you're in, some of my eyes are shagged anyway, do you know what I mean? So it's not going to make any fucking difference at this stage. But I think people are just going to be, once people can take the shackles off, the shackles are going to come off in a big way, I think.
Yeah, I'd say that will happen, yeah. And then it'll be, once things settle down, it'll be interesting to see what way people go after that. But I think what I'd be really looking at there is the whole kind of, not conferencing, but I suppose the whole corporate sector and corporate travel and things like that is going to be really interesting to see what way that goes in the future. I mean, will they really fly people all over the world for a meeting for a day or two when people are used to it now, doing it on a Zoom call or on a...
No, I think corporate travel, I think it's dead. I think it's dead in the water. I think there are people who have run multi-million, billion-dollar enterprises from Zoom for the last number of months. And look, obviously there are some meetings and there are some things that you need to do in person. I'm involved with a couple of things there now around kind of mergers and acquisitions and stuff like that at the moment. And to fly someone into the country and get it over and done with in the space of 2 weeks has taken almost the bones of 8 months to get done, just purely on the basis of you can't do certain things unless you're in person. But in terms of those little, if you have to go to a site visit, if you're visiting a manufacturing plant or something like that, then I understand the need for travel. But this idea of people going for a few meetings here and there, I think those days are dead, to be honest.
Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting, and there's a lot of hotels and there's a lot of business around that area too. Like, I mean, midweek hotel travel, the hotel stays, flights. There's going to be people going to have to rethink all of that business, and they're going to have to go after a new audience in the future. They'll be glad of any audience, I suppose, when this is all over. But that's one area that I'd be really interested to see what's going to happen. And obviously, the other thing will more people have a kind of a half and half week with work as well, half their week at home, half their week in the office, and shared office environments whereby you don't really own a desk anymore. You kind of like hot desking in every organization. Whoever's in on Monday or Tuesday or whatever you're in again, Wednesday, Thursday, that kind of a thing. I'd say we're going to see more of that, especially countries that maybe have a head office in Dublin, or companies that have a head office in Dublin rather than maybe little offices around the country. They could have people in Kerry, they could have people in Galway, Cork, you name it. So yeah, it's hard to know. Maybe we will just reset the button and go back to where we were February last year, but I don't think so.
In terms, I suppose, I said I'd bring it up early now and get it out in the open. The two E's are, I'm impartial, I suppose, here. Like, you're both involved in education at the moment, whereas UCC and I keep going to say CIT, but I can't say that anymore. It's MTU now.
Yeah.
But how have you found that whole experience, I suppose, of actually, delivering lectures online more so? I know you were doing a little bit before with the online, but how have you found that whole transition?
Yeah, it was interesting because, I did have experience. There was a few of us had experience of doing it because we launched Masters in Digital Marketing part-time online about 3 years ago. And it was a slow burner, to be honest, because one of the things that people really wanted was to be in the classroom. But what we've seen now is we've seen that, I suppose, under the new guys of MTU, we've seen it open up to a whole realm of students across the country. We've people literally as far as Letterkenny, Sligo, lots from Dublin, the west of Ireland and stuff like that. So the classes are very different to what they used to be before. And even some of our international students are actually not in Cork, they're actually overseas. So that has changed. Interaction is a bit trickier. It's very hard to read the room. You're looking it's hard to tell people turn on their cameras because you don't know what way they're feeling at any given time. So it's not for me to kind of tell them, look, lads, turn on your cameras there. Because people feel uncomfortable, and sometimes it can be a distracting thing as well where they're looking at everyone else. I find in the smaller classes it works better if their cameras are on. The bigger classes it doesn't really matter because you can't see everybody anyway. The interaction on maybe some of the younger undergrads, they like actually putting questions into the chat box, so they kind of like that. Whereas I find that the older
it's very unusual because they wouldn't do it in person, probably.
They wouldn't, you see. So maybe there's a false sense of security with them, and so you get a slight bit more interaction than maybe you're used to with first years. Whereas I think some of the older students are trying to figure out. I think they're struggling with it. So interaction isn't as maybe strong. You'll always get the few that talk for the rest of the class. You'll always get the 3 or 4, but that's the silent majority are the ones that you'd worry about. But they're adapting to it. There's some benefits. I think I've heard you talking about this as well. The fact that you can get guest lectures on,
so easily now.
So easily, yeah. That's one thing. And it doesn't take up too much of their time. They can pop on for an hour and literally get back to their work straight away afterwards. So that has been a great benefit. So I probably had more guest lecturers on than I've ever had before for that reason, because usually I can't fit them in because they can't make it at a specific time or whatever like that. So we can slot that stuff in. The other advantage to students is all these things are recorded as well. So if you miss something, you can catch up on it. No,
or do a binge at the weekend.
Yeah, and you can see it coming up to assignments. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
So it's different.
Do you think you had to and it's something we've talked about with the two of us, where over the last 12 months have you had to adapt what you teach and have to adapt the content and change it slightly, or is it kind of a thing where we'll keep going the way we were and we'll see how it plays out, and we don't want to change too much if the landscape hasn't changed when we come out of it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I found I've had to put in more. The conversations don't last as long online. So if I was in a classroom, you can nearly, and Dave would probably know this as well, you can nearly see who's about to ask you a question. As you glance around the room, you can kind of you could focus in on one or two people there. You could see that they're just about to kind of say something. So you stop, you give them a chance. You don't know that actually when you're online. So you kind of keep talking. So maybe they're afraid to interrupt you. So that's the trickier one, but you go through content faster online. So if I had to put in a lot more case studies, and I suppose what I do a bit more now than I wouldn't in classes, I put them into groups and stuff. That is the thing that you can do, put them into like breakout rooms and stuff like that. Although I have found as well that when I've done that, sometimes students drop off the call. So then
I've heard that. All right, I don't do breakout rooms myself because if I was in that situation, I'd hate it, and it's not something you do in a normal lecture. But I've heard some of my colleagues saying that as soon as the word breakout rooms is ushered, you can see the numbers just going bang, 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 down. Like, do you know what I mean? And it's like, I have to say, for me, it's been a very negative experience. There are some benefits, like you said, there guest lectures and things like that. I think the recording aspect, I think, is a negative personally. Mm-hmm. I think that, no, I don't care what anyone says. There's a big difference between someone going back on something and reviewing it versus learning it for the first time in an online environment. If you're in an online environment, you're looking at your phone, you're sipping away on bloody tea, you're looking around the room. If you're in a lecture, by way of the way a lecture is designed, and this was, if you go back to even the history of why a lecture is designed in a certain way, it's designed to create an immersive experience where you're focused on what is being said and what is being delivered. I don't think that happens in an online environment. And for me, the hardest thing, and you kind of mentioned it there, even if people are asking questions in an online environment, one thing that you lose is your ability to read a room.
Yeah.
And you can kind of get a sense of they're getting this, they're not understanding this. And I'd even know this year there'd be points in the lecture where they don't understand this. And it's you teach so that they don't understand it fully because you want them to ask the question and you can elaborate upon it. Now you're asking, and do you all understand this? And it's radio silence, and you're going, I know you don't understand this because no the year before you has understood this, So I think it's for me it's been very negative, I have to say. And the main look, and I think there is a difference as well between people doing online classes when everyone is locked inside anyway. I think in a world whereby people are out and about on campus, that blended experience is probably not as, it's not going to be as easy as people think it is, I'd say. Like, where do people go if they're watching a lecture? Do they go back to their home? Do they have to go to the library? Is there enough space in the library for them to listen to a lecture? Do how does that actually happen if you've back-to-back classes or if your campus is very, very spread out? So I think the blended approach is the way to go in a variety of different ways, guest lectures and so on and so forth. But in terms of, I would worry that people at the universities will say, can save a few bob here on building stuff and maintenance and stuff like that, where we try and put more online. And I would worry that's what a lot of people may try and do.
Yeah, that's a big worry. Yeah, and I think that will fail in the long term. I'm sure, Dave, you're a bit like myself. You miss the kind of... I always see lecturing as a bit of an entertainment factor as well, because you have to. If you're standing at the top,
it's a performance.
Yeah, it's a performance, and the performance is not there with online. It's very hard to perform online. I was interested because I was doing as part of Erasmus program there. We're partnered with IUT Lyon, and they asked. I was over there 2 years ago giving guest lectures. And they just about understood the thick Cork accent that I have. But so I was giving a lecture 2 weeks ago, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. No, I gave a lecture again. But I was talking to the guy that was coordinated beforehand. And he says, I said to him, I presume you're online like us. He says, yeah. He says, it's like, he says, we're on TV now. And I said, yeah, I didn't think of it that way. I says, yeah. I said, I feel like presenting the news at 6 o'clock, like Katrina Perry or bloody Dave McCullough or something like that, sitting there. Because that's what you're kind of doing, actually. Because you're throwing a few things up, videos up, a few slides up, and you're talking all the way, but they only see your head and shoulders as such,
Probably another big aspect that's been missing, and we've talked about it, and I know from my time out in CIT, the whole aspect of actually getting to meet the people that you're in class with, and the networking, and I know CIT do a lot with in terms of like the marketing society out there and all this kind of stuff. That whole element is gone, and we've talked about, like Dave said, we've said, we hate to be a first year going into college nowadays because you're missing that whole college life, and there's more to it than just sitting in the lecture hall. You're missing the social side of it as well, which is a huge aspect. And coming in terms of, in our profession now, in terms of marketing, it's all about networking, and it's all about getting to know who's sitting beside you, whether it's in the business or a class coming out of it. And I've met some great friends, but also in terms of business, people that I would call on out of CIT. So you're kind of missing that whole aspect as well, which is going to be a new boundary to deal with when they come out.
the coffee break is a huge loss. In particular, Dave, that program that you were on, so like the masters, like I suppose the master in digital marketing strategy in particular, was like a core group of people. Like you would have 20 people, and they could all be gathered around one or two tables.
Yeah.
And there might be nobody else on campus because it could be a Saturday morning, and depending on what time you had the class or whatever, or it could be Wednesday night. And
it was also as great as you were sitting down with, because like say like yourself or the other lecturers.
Yeah.
And what I like is the fact that it's coming from someone that's working in the profession, so you're able to bounce ideas off the lecturers as well, which is great.
So that's all gone. Like that's the thing. Like that. Like like one of the big negatives is there's a whole group of students that I have this year. It's our first time doing a full-time master's in digital marketing strategy, and I've never met the class in person, and there's going to come a time I'm going to walk past one of them in the street, I'd say, and they're going to say,
there's your man off the telly.
There's your man off the news. And they're going to say hello to me, and I'm going to be like, who's that? Whereas that would never happen. That would never happen with the other groups that I've had on campus. Obviously, it would happen with some of the undergrads, because I'm sure they would know from UCC, when you have a big class of over 100 or whatever, it's impossible to know all their names. It's just impossible. You will never know all their names.
Oh, you won't even have the opportunity to learn their name once. Never mind, remember it. Like it's not conducive to it. But that being said, as I always say, when you're doing a lecture, you're lecturing to only a few people, but you're ultimately lecturing to everyone. And through building a relationship with a few people in the audience, you're kind of building a relationship with the whole room. It's almost like the comedian factor, right? I'm not describing lecturers as comedians. Yeah. But like if you're talking to one, that's it. I know. Yeah, it depends on what class it is. 9 o'clock on a Monday morning after Monday club, you'd be surprised. Like, but it's a very that relation, I think I've said this a few times, it's changed what has been a very, very relational process into a transactional one, in that you're almost dumping information on people and it's up to them to do all of the work. Whereas before, there was that element of a kind of a co-production going on between them and yourself in terms of the overall performance. And no, I think, look, it'll be interesting to see how we get in, but no, I cannot wait to get back on campus now, I have to say.
Yeah, it'd be good when we get back. Like, yeah. It did happen to me one day, actually, because speaking of, like, I had history of this, obviously, as I said, 3 years ago, we launched that one, and I was inside, and I think it was Douglas Village Shopping Centre one day, and this girl comes up to me, she says, hi, and I looked, and she says, I'm on your class online. She said, loving the lectures, and I was like, oh, sorry. I said, I know all the people on the online course. I said,
and then which one are you?
Yeah, so then I had to go back and check the list, and then, of course, the good thing about that, and I always say that to students as well, is like, make sure that you tell us, because like it's very hard for us to remember everybody. So like if you engage online, that's probably the best thing that you can do. So if you comment back on a social media post or something like that, eventually you get to know somebody over time. And like, that kind of idea. And of course, what I would have done straight away is said, it was great to meet such a person the other day. I got to meet one of you in the real world at last. And it's that kind of joking, that will probably happen in the future again, where we'll probably have a whole cohort of students. I go through the village there one or 2 days there, and there'll be cars beeping at me. All right, Stephen. And I'd be like, who is that? Like, I'm sure it's a student, like, you know what I mean? You're seeing these people, like, I think in the last semester I had 350 of them. And I'd say of that, I've only lectured about maybe 60 of them in person before, so that means that there's 280 floating around that I never lectured in person, so, it's a different world.
Have you had any embarrassing moments running into students outside of lectures by any chance? Because I've got one.
This is not the place for this now.
No, I behaved myself outside of college.
It wasn't that at all. I was in a pub. I was in the Raven, actually, and in with a group of my mates, and sat down at a table. There was a group of people next. They were students. I hadn't a clue they were students from 2 years ago. I just didn't recognize them, whatever. And I went out and I went on the phone, and I could hear, just as I was walking out the door, one of the group in the group next to us whisper to one of his mates, "That's Digital Dave." I swear to God, I was with two of my mates and they spat their pints all over the fucking place. They were like, this is the funniest thing that's ever fucking happened. And that's a name that I haven't shook since with my mates, like, which is absolutely so. Thanks very much to that group of students, whoever you are.
It is funny when you come in, like, the big thing I get is from my kids, are they anyone that says hello? Are they one of your students, Dad? Like, because they've had so many situations whereby, like, for example, down in Killarney last summer, doing the old staycation thing, and walked into, I think it was Murphy's Ice Cream, and I was getting ice cream. Hi, Stephen, how are you? And it was one of my students. And then walking down the road, there was another one, and then into another place, there was another one again. I was up in Kildare. I bumped into one. So no matter where I was in the country, I was starting to bump into either current students or past students. So you get a lot of that. Like, it's kind of funny. You don't kind of realize how many people you come across when you're lecturing like that over your life. And I've only been doing this game now. I've been doing it 7 years or something like that. But already into the thousands, like,
And speaking of that, Stephen, I suppose, like, so we get into probably the career moves in a minute.
Yeah.
Did you always envisage yourself going into lecturing? Like, was it always a path for you?
Not at all. No, not at all. If you had asked me that question, I would say, when did it change? I would say maybe it was it was over 10 years ago. I'd say that maybe the first taste I got of this was, I suppose, when I started to do guest talks on Fota for Falls Ireland. And that was, I would say, around 2009. And the reason I was asked to do guest talks is we were the first crowd to do social media. And I was doing a talk, and then I gave a talk for a British and Irish Zoo conference. And I just started getting asked for loads of different Cork County Council, the Chamber of Commerce. They were all starting to ask me to give these talks. And for a while, it was interesting. For a while, I was kind of giving the same talk. And then after a while, you see the same people starting to appear in front of you. So you're changing it up then. You have to change, because you can't be the one trick pony. Because I've seen people do that over the years, and I'm kind of turning up and saying, here they go again. Here's the same story. So I'd always figure out who's in the room first, try and judge the audience. So then I kind of got into it, and I suppose it came to 2014, and I remember having a coffee with Pio in out in CIT at the time, and Pio was only kind of after taking over as the head of marketing and international business, and he said, look, they were looking at doing a new course. He said, for people who had done their degree but wanted to learn a bit about digital, would I be interested in lecturing on it? And I said, yeah, definitely. He said, would you throw your name into the ring? I think you'd be a great candidate for it. He said, lots of people have mentioned your name around the place. They've heard you doing guest talks and this, and that's kind of where it kicked off, I suppose. So I applied, and my first year I gave one class. The next year I was doing two classes, and then all of a sudden I'm there more than I'm anywhere else. So it kind of happened by default. But what I found is I started to like it as I started to do a bit more of it. And I flipped it on its head then, I suppose, maybe 2 to 3 years ago, where I kind of said, okay, I want to do this kind of more of the time, and then some other stuff as well, But yeah, never, like, I'd say when I was doing my degree and my master's, I never had envisaged to come back as a lecturer,
And I don't think anyone does, really. Like, it is a strange career, and a very, very small amount of people, as a proportion to other kind of jobs, actually end up doing it. And I suppose it's like, it was always like, even when I started off my undergrad degree, however many years ago that was, you're being lectured by people, and you're kind of like what do they do to be a lecturer? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's not as if you go and get a lecturer qualification. Do you know what I mean? So it's a very, very strange one in terms of how it works.
Yeah, and it's different, as you said. Like, I never thought of that way. It's different to primary or secondary school teachers, whereby there's a lot more of them because their classes are smaller in size usually. With us, it's there's bigger numbers. So like you 120 in a class or something like that. You're going to have less of us in general, and of course, not everyone goes into college either. That's the other thing. So whereas everyone does go to primary school and secondary school, so the numbers are smaller.
And speaking of that, then, have you seen I've definitely noticed that even in the last couple of years, But have you seen a big intake in terms of people going towards marketing as a career?
Oh yeah, big time. I say this to students as well a lot. Like, I mean, our department, for example, to give you an indication of our department, when PO took over, I think there was about 150 students. I think we're up to 900 now. It got to the stage where we were the kind of little bit at the end when it came to graduations. And if we were to do a real days one now, for example, like, you know, like when they have the graduation days, I think we actually would have a full day just by ourselves. That was supposed to happen in 2020, but it was virtual instead. But so, like, that's how it's gone. But I've also said to students years ago, I would have said if anyone had a qualification in marketing, like I said, you know, you're going to end up in Dublin. You know, realistically, that's where you're going to end up. But actually, no, I was only going showing the students yesterday. I was going through something, and I was just going through LinkedIn, and I was looking at the amount of marketing jobs floating around. Like in Cork is phenomenal. Marketing has become a bit like accounting, because what has happened is that.
Oh geez, don't ruin the profession, please.
Don't worry. Dave would notice, I always have a go off the accountants if I hear an accountant in the room. But like what's happening is businesses are taking it serious. So even the small businesses have someone do marketing now, whereas that was never even thought of before. So you have companies now that might have 10 employees, and one of them will be doing some sort of marketing, because what they're really doing is they're looking after social, which is also looking after customer care, which is also looking after maybe distribution or logistics or anything like that, because it's part of that process. If they have e-commerce, lead generation or anything like that. So just marketing is having a huge role in office environments now, but in retail, in so many different, in food, hospitality, you name it. Whereas I said before, it was handed off to an agency and it was an afterthought. You see, the thing was, if you had a load of cash, you just went into the newspaper or the radio station or TV station. If you really had serious money and you spent your ad budget there, and that was it, job done. You can't walk away from marketing. No, you can't just kind of spend money and walk away. You have to monitor it. But most of the time, you have to create content as well. It's not good enough just to, like, there's no point spending money on advertising if you have nothing to back it up when they come to the website. You know, if there's nothing on the website, there's nothing on their Facebook or nothing on their Instagram or wherever they are trying to get the audience. So as a result, I've seen like a huge shift towards looking for marketeers, and the most bizarre companies, even like, you know, like small little tiny businesses like little cafes are looking for marketeers now, whereas before they wouldn't even spend money on an ad.
It's a changing environment though, when like I always give the example before that digital has leveled the playing field, but it's also increased the cost. If you are to take advertising as a cost, now you should never look at advertising as a cost center, but if you are to take it as a cost when you're doing your budget at the start of the year, before, unless you could spend 100 grand minimum on your ad in the Irish Examiner or your campaign, I should say, in the Irish Examiner with your billboards, or you had enough budget to go on television, if you didn't have that minimum threshold, you were not playing that game because you just couldn't afford it. If you have a budget of 200 quid a month, you're playing that game, and it doesn't matter what you're spending on distribution in terms of 200 quid, 500 quid, 10 grand. The content is what's going to differentiate you ultimately. And therefore you still have to invest in your marketers and your content creators and so on and so forth. No, I've like in the last 6 months, I've worked with 3 or 4 companies who before, to be honest with you, I wouldn't have even thought of working for, because I'm just like, oh, they're a bit small. I'm going to be a bit expensive. This is going to be a bit of a challenge. Whereas now they're kind of going, no, we want you, and we want you to hire in an e-commerce manager as well on top of that, because we're digitizing and we want this to be almost like a new store for us, which it is. But they wouldn't have looked at that previously. It would have been kind of a standalone brochure website, and they would have left it there for years and years on end, kind of a thing. So no, I think the opportunities for kids nowadays to get into marketing at an early stage is much changed, and the proper marketing jobs as well. Before you'd have a lot of what would fall into, they were either called marketing assistants or marketing administration, which is basically you're doing 90% kind of customer support and a little bit on the side. Whereas now there's proper, really interesting jobs out there, I think.
We spoke about at the very start, when we started doing this podcast, it was around that kind of time where businesses started, kind of switching to online and started switching to looking at and doing a bit of e-commerce, and because they had no other choice. If they wanted to survive, they needed to do either click and collect or deliveries or whatever. And businesses, as you already said, that never even knew what marketing was, never had any interest in it, had a Facebook page, they might have posted last year sometimes, that kind of a thing. Get it up every couple of months, every now and again they get a post up, but putting serious work into it, being creative. I think I talked about it before, about they're putting that kind of entrepreneurial cap back on to see what they can do with the resources that they have. So it's great to see that, and obviously the students of both of your courses are going to be benefiting from that going forward.
There's a huge appetite for it there, and actually I think in many ways we're going to have to, and I've said this before, I just before one of the last talks I did outside of college before COVID was I gave a talk to transition year students out in transition year, 5th year, and actually 6th year I think as well, out in Coachford Community College. They asked me to come out. They asked for someone from the college to come out and give a talk about marketing as a course, as an option. And the amount of students that kind of didn't realize what was involved in marketing was phenomenal, which kind of made me think that there wasn't a job being done at second level on this, that it's seen as the kind of poor relation of being, of an accountant or a lawyer or a solicitor, or, like the other traditional kind of office-based type of jobs. And I remember at one of the open days, a parent came up to me. This was, again, at one of the open days for the college back in November 2019 or something. He says, "What kind of money do they pay now?" He says, "In that." That's all he was thinking about. Like, I was like, but I said, "How long is a piece of string? It depends on how good you are." Like, it comes down to, I say, some people are on serious money, other people, they're at the bottom, but that's in every industry.
We talked about as well over the last couple of weeks about probably why the rise in people going into social media and stuff like that is due to this whole, we try not get too far into the whole area of the old influencers, that people are seeing, geez, there's a bit of money to be made in putting up a couple of pictures every now and again, that kind of a thing. So that's definitely probably increased the want there to go into this area.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that, and I know you don't want to go into that area, but a lot of them are getting serious.
Don't get there started on influencers.
I've seen a lot of them come into college and do our course by night. Why? Because they want to get the business acumen to back up the soft sell that they're doing online, because they want to have longevity as well. They want to figure out what else they could do and put some sort of strategies towards it, and figure out kind of partnerships and things like that going forward, so that they're not being conned. So we're seeing lots of different. So we're seeing the creative people that maybe, like I had a guy in a course last year, and he's a bit of a comedian, and he was into do it. I have fashion bloggers in, I have people that were into food, coming in to learn kind of a bit more about marketing, because they got a feel for it because of social, but now they're kind of saying, what else could we learn? That we could maybe step up another bit. And I think that exact same thing is happening with small businesses all over the country. I mean, there was a fascinating stat, I think it was from PwC or Deloitte, before COVID, 25% of Irish businesses still didn't have a website. I mean, that's crazy, like that they couldn't be found online, and I'm sure there's still probably a few that haven't gone on in there. And some people think it's all, pretend. It's like, the colouring department, as they call marketing, like at times, like, they think it's just all made up stuff. It's not. Like, just because you can't prove that marketing doesn't work unless you do a bit of research, doesn't mean that it isn't working. It's just the fact that, somebody needs to hear about your brand somewhere. And today it's on social, today it's on digital, just like in the past it was happening in the local pub. You know what I mean? So it's just it's changed, like.
That being said, and I was actually talking to a pretty high up fella now in terms of business circles in Ireland in general, and he made an interesting enough point, was that he said there has been a massive increase in the amount of students specializing in marketing, coming from kind of traditional business studies or commerce courses, or actually doing marketing courses from the start. And what he said was that depending on the course that you come from, there is a lot of people who are lacking in, they're good at the market in terms of understanding social media, how it works, brand, very, very little commercial awareness.
Yeah.
Like I would actually find, and I do that with my students. They kind of look at me going, why are we talking about business models and dispersion of trends and consume all this kind of stuff? And I'm kind of like, unless you understand where the commercial opportunity is, you're strategizing around nothing. Yeah. You need some sort of objective to aim towards. And I think we will actually end up in a situation whereby, like the same way that the accountants are now kind of accredited by a variety of bodies, I think you will end up in a situation whereby you will be accredited as a marketer for having a certain skill sets in terms of budgeting, understanding Google Analytics, understanding Facebook, all these kind of things, because it's now getting so technical that there's a lot of people out there bluffing, not really knowing about these things, or they're very, very good at social media and they're not good at analytics. And that's okay. Marketing is a blend of art and science. I've always kind of said that, but you can't pitch yourself as the marketer who is all knowing if you're really, really good at content creation, but you're weak on the analytics side. I think businesses need to be honest with themselves in terms of what they need. And I think marketers need to be honest with themselves in terms of what type of marketer are you? Like in the same way that you have fund accountants, you've tax accountants, you've audit accountants. It's obviously different types of marketing.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah.
And we're all kind of lumped into the same bucket in many ways. I think that is something that is probably going to become more refined in the next kind of 5 to 10 years, I think.
So taking it back then to the start. So we know you definitely
40 minutes in and we're going back to the start.
No, we're going back to the start because we never got to talk about it. If you gave me an option now of a dream job.
Jesus, we'll be here for about 3 hours.
No, if you gave me the option of a dream job, I'm telling you, it's going to be sitting down in Fota looking out at the monkeys swinging around the place. To me, that was a fantastic job for you. But what I really find interesting is you were there at the start of the whole kind of, I suppose, the digital. I think I heard you calling it before, like the whole digital revolution, I suppose. So, how was that whole era? How was that whole time, I suppose, of actually coming from? We already talked about it there. Looking at your traditional budgets each year. To transferring it into digital.
It was a nice time to go in because if you're first in, I'm sure you're all familiar with the phrase "first in wins," and it kind of was a bit like that, because everyone else was kind of dismissing it at the time. If you think about social, I remember I joined Fota in November 2008, and I went to a talk in the Elysium. The Elysium was only after opening, I think, actually, and they had a talk on this kind of showrooms downstairs, where Aldi is actually now. In December, I think the Marketing Institute was putting a talk on. There was a guy from Meteor talking at it, and he was talking about how they were putting a budget into social this Christmas, and he said they were putting it behind Bebo, and they had this mobile genie, and the whole campaign was to get the young audience, because all the college students were on this platform Bebo, and I had been playing around with Bebo. At this point, I had got loads of people asking me to join Facebook, and I always kind of was like, nah, that's a load of nonsense, people sharing rubbish. But it was when I saw how it could benefit business, I started getting interested in the whole thing. And at this point in Ireland, very few people were on social. And I actually think the turning point for social in Ireland was 2010. That was mainstream, and that mainly came down to smartphones kind of becoming a bit bigger, coming a bit cheaper, things like that as well. So I was able to experiment, but most of my budget was being spent on traditional still. But I had time to spend. You see, when you put a lot of your focus on traditional marketing at the start of the year, because we were seasonal in terms of the majority of our visitors would come between March and September, and then the winter months is quiet. So I went in November, so I was able to get the ground running kind of quick in terms of getting all my campaigns ready for, print, radio. We weren't doing billboard back then. We were kind of doing a lot of brochures and kind of hotel magazines and all that kind of stuff. And I started fooling around with social because we were building a website. And when we built the website, I always remember talking to lads, and there was only 3 of them that time, Jor in Studio 49. And I was telling Jor, I said, look, Jor, I want some sort of interaction with social media. I was only setting up the accounts. I set up Fota's Facebook page, Twitter account, YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff. And I said, I think this is going to be big for us, but I'm not going to properly launch them until our website is ready. Because I felt that what's the point in having building an audience on social and talking and trying to refer them to a site that was awful. I felt that if the site was right by the summer that year, that we could really push it. And of course, you'd have people in the park. And what I did first of all to get people to sign up, I put posters all over the park. Follow us on Facebook. Of course, there was only going to be a small percentage of people that would actually probably follow us because they didn't have the platform. But as time moved on, they got into the habit of doing it. And then what we did was we did competitions. So when we did name the animals or whatever, I always remember like I'd put the competition out there. I'd say name a giraffe, name a monkey or cheetah. And what they would do is when they came to the website, they might hear it on radio or they might see it on the RT News or something like that. When they came to the website, they'd fill in the details. I had SurveyMonkey embedded. So when they clicked to submit, it would bring them to our Facebook page so that would be where they're finishing up. So at that point then, if they were actually already logged into Facebook on their laptop, they were probably going to press the like button, and we built an audience on the back of it. So it grew bit by bit, and every year I would have said it would nearly double. So in year 1, it was like 6,000. Year 2 was like 12. Then it went up to kind of 24. And I think in 2014, it catapulted because I kind of spotted the kind of, I suppose, an opportunity that if we did competitions on a consistent level around the same time every week, once a week, we could build an audience. And that's kind of some of the fun I had around it. So, it was great. It was like a blank canvas at the start. Nowadays, I feel sorry for people because the channels are kind of established. Bar maybe TikTok, there's a bit of opportunity there. It's much harder to get organic reach on the platforms now than when it was back then. So like nearly every post I put up on Facebook in 2009, 2010 was getting at least 60% reach, at least. Some of them were getting 300, 400, 1,000% in some cases, so there was huge opportunities to grow.
And do you think people miss out on that element of using social, especially probably people that are new to the platform, but missing out on that element of it's there as a communication platform to build an audience, but build a relationship as well?
I always thought it was a community based, more so than a revenue kind of thing. I always felt this was, we're all familiar with the digital trifecta and this idea of owned media. It wasn't a term when I first started doing it. I was just thinking I want to build a community online that I can talk to. That's basically, and I always thought it as a place. The bigger this is, the better chance that I have of growing the business in the real world. That's as simple as that, because the maths will work, because there's always going to be a certain element of them will want to come. And if you're telling them over and over and over again how great something is or what's happening, the news of events and all that kind of stuff, it's going to trigger and it's going to be top of mind, because if we keep seeing things over and over and over again, it's going to resonate with us after a while. And so when it comes to a lovely sunny morning and it's a Sunday, you're going to pick Fota because you're after seeing it about 5 times in the week already, and it's been part of your kind of on your agenda to do at some stage. And now you think, well, it's a beautiful day, why don't we go down? And then all of a sudden I put up a post on a Sunday morning and away it goes. So yeah, I think people are missing that. I think people are forgetting the fact that build a community. Too much focus on social is selling. Too much focus is actually what I hate on social is the amount of ads. It drives me crackers. I know the platforms obviously need it, but I think some businesses are spending way too much money on it as well. And I think that if especially some of the stuff I hear is like the retargeting, programmatic stuff like that. Like, I mean, it reminds me of a bad stalker. If they want to buy something from you, they'll buy it when they're ready. You don't need to haunt them for 2 weeks online just because they visited your website. People do research as well. I mean, Lesbian A has done a lot of stuff around this, and he's looked at this whole idea that, when you search on Google, usually there is an intent to buy, but there's about a month of a delay in some cases, and sometimes it could be even longer if it's a car. Like you're not going to just look up a car and then buy it straight away, or a house. You know what I mean? So I think people need to go back to that kind of what social was, and that is to talk to people, to kind of communicate with them, to find. I think when
you look at platforms like Facebook, I've definitely seen, like we've all seen it in terms of reach. It definitely is going down in terms of
Yeah.
You know, because you're not paying to play, and the platform is just totally gone that way.
Mm.
It's not too bad on the others, to be honest. You know, it's not fully there, as in taken over in terms of the ads yet. Like, you can still, if you do it right, you can still have your consistent audience, as long as you're being consistent. But I think there's definitely an area there for the advertising. But I know what you're saying in terms of, you know, spending too much. So would you say kind of probably put more of that kind of that spend into the content creation side of things?
Into creativity, yeah, without a doubt. I think people are putting a lot of money behind ads, and sometimes their content is woeful. And actually, we like to buy things that we kind of like as well, that we can, I suppose, when we're looking at some, we make decisions based on what we see, or possibly what we hear, or what we feel or touch, or whatever. It's that, you know, that stuff that we can kind of associate with maybe something really nice that happens in our life or whatever. We're forgetting that. We're forgetting that maybe a powerful video will do far better than chasing people around with a retargeted ad for about 2 weeks. You know, real strong video will do that. I mean, some great campaigns out there whereby, you know, they put out a nice video and people talk about them all of a sudden, you know, and the budgets. I mean, go back to Dove a few years ago, the real beauty sketches there. Like, I mean, it couldn't have possibly cost them that much money to make those, because what they did was they got an FBI forensic artist and they paid people to come in and he did their picture. No, imagine that cost versus filming in loads of locations around the world, filming, you know, top actors and actresses and paying them money for it. It couldn't have been that expensive. And they didn't spend a load of money on the advertising, which was the key. It was a digital kind of campaign, and it was then backed up with some kind of billboard stuff around New York and places like that. They did the subway and those type of things. So, you know, there's a lot of great examples of campaigns that are actually really cheap to make, but there was thought into it.
Like video is an expensive thing, but I think you pay for the quality of it more so. Do you know? But I think you have to be. It's not just we talked about. We had Ray Kyoder on a couple of weeks ago, who's done work for myself and Dave, and it's more so about the thought and the process put into it, the creativity behind it, and not just getting a videographer in and just saying, here, this is the video I want, good luck to you. Do you know, you have to actually put a bit of work and thought into it.
Yeah, you have to take your time. I mean, the most successful music video to ever come out of this country only cost €1,500 to make. You know, Take Me to Church.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Made in Cork by Brendan and Con. And, you know, phenomenal, like, what they did. The other great one was, and I had her at my first conference with Stephanie Rainey, and she put out the video there, like, you know, Please Don't Go. And it, I think, had 1.5 million views or something on Facebook, and got a record deal with Warner, you know, and she got a friend to film that in a room, and just got the people in to kind of be on the camera. So, I mean, but there was a thought process in all of those, you know, so there was thought, okay, what do we need to put in here to kind of capture people's attention? And that's what makes things go viral. I mean, you know, an ad saying it's only $9.99 or something this weekend, like, that's never going to go viral ever. Like, it will not. You're going to have to pump money behind those. And there's always a place for that. There's always a place for activation, sales activation. But I think a lot of businesses are missing the brand building side. And the brand building side is making great content that people will remember for years, you know. And I'm not seeing as much of that recently. I have to say, I think marketing is going down a dangerous route of everything is kind of too targeted and too focused on advertising in recent times, digital advertising, you know, because some of the TV stuff, the brand building stuff, is brilliant, you know.
Yeah, I'd agree and I'd disagree. Like, I mean, if I was investing in a video, and I agree with you in terms of the creativity being the differentiator, like that's absolutely key. There's no question about that. But I think that there's a bit of a misconception that all the stuff that you're selling, shall we say, or as you say, sales activation, needs to be a paid ad, and all the stuff which is brand building is organic.
Yeah. I
would almost say that, like what I say, if I'm spending $5,000, let's say, on creating an ad, and I say an ad, a piece of content, be it a podcast or be it a be it a 5-minute interview or a mini documentary, whatever the case is, I'll say to the client, whoever I'm working with, yeah, you're spending your $5,000. You also need to spend $5,000 to advertise and push this to people, because otherwise it's going to just go to your audience. And is reinforcement important? Yeah, of course it is. But if you want to reach a new audience, I'm like, I don't mind like sponsored content. To me, I'm a big pay-to-play guy. I love Facebook's advertising platform. As a marketer, it is an absolute dream to use in terms of its targeting. But ultimately, it comes back to the content. I have no problem investing a huge amount in advertising. And I myself would be different probably to you, Dave, and probably a little bit to you as well, Steve, in terms of I would invest more of my time in a good paid media strategy than I would in organic brand building nowadays.
Yeah.
10 years ago, different story entirely. But I think now there's so much power with those ad tools in terms of targeting. Now, again, you don't want to pester people. I'm not saying that. But if you are able to map out a journey and build in the right brand building properties across that journey, and you can advertise that, I think the return on investment is far higher than you're going to get off organic these days, to be honest.
I think that's going back to what I kind of said there around it depends on the platform. So as you said there, Facebook is kind of the dream for targeting. But if you look at the likes of Instagram or, you mentioned TikTok there, whatever, that's all about brand building. That's all about creating the relationship. And I think you can do a lot more on those platforms without the budget, as long as you're doing it right organically.
I disagree on it. I think Instagram is paid for me anyway.
But if you're consistent, if you're consistent on Instagram, you'll keep your viewership there and your audience there, as long as you're consistent, because the algorithm helps with that. But yes, a little bit of money is going to have to be put in terms of making it bigger, making your audience bigger, and getting to further people. But I definitely think you can do a good job on Instagram with very little money.
Yeah, and what's interesting, TikTok reminds me of the early days of Facebook, because I see brands there that are getting massive reach, because it's the For You page that they have is really interesting, that it kind of populates stuff that you might like, so suggest things even if you don't follow them, and it's actually preferencing that type of stuff rather than the actual things that the people that you're friends with or the companies that you followed already. I was talking, there was a first year student of mine there recently, and she works for a cafe in town, and she said that she put up a little video. So they asked her, would she do some TikTok videos of the products? And one of the videos, 150,000 views. Like, that was incredible. Like, for a place that was only their fourth video that they had put up, but because it engaged and they had kind of cool music on it and the whole thing looked really good, it just went viral for them. So I think that that kind of thing is interesting, because on a small scale it works really well. But I'd agree with Dave in terms of that you do have to spend money as well. I've always the most famous quote, and he's passed away now, a former chairman of Fota. He said to me in one of the early days, he said, you know what, Stephen? He said, you're the most expensive animal in this park. And he was right, like, because I was a big believer in, if we spent the money, we could make a big brand out of Fota, and I felt that was a sleeping giant, basically.
It was actually funny. I think I heard you saying this before, actually, in terms of Fota. You said that it kind of became a thing. Was it a journalist or a photographer or something said to you when there was basically a newborn going to be around? You kind of had it planned. Yeah,
well, everything was timed. Like we keep it a secret until we knew, we needed it. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously the staff knew and stuff like that, but we wouldn't tell the public. And sometimes it would be in front of them, but they might notice it. But like, we'd usually wait till maybe the weather, we'd look at the weather forecast, the weather was going to be decent, we'd put something out for that, guaranteed coming up to like a big occasion like Mother's Day or Valentine's or, Father's Day, that type of stuff. We tie it into a story, or again, school holidays or something like that as well. Like, I'd wait, and I'd picked in, if I felt if it was a very local story, I'd go earlier in the week to get into the regional papers, the likes of your weekly papers. You'd have to go on a Tuesday with the story. If I wanted to kind of go national, I would wait till Thursday to get into the Fridays, or even wait till Friday itself and get into some of the Saturday papers. But for national radio, Friday afternoons, they're always looking for a feel-good story, and national TV the same.
What's funny, even the way you're saying that, and the way you're saying the days and the times, and knowing the newspapers, knowing the radios and stuff like that, like you don't really hear people like say coming out of your classes or Dave's classes or any kind of digital marketing that you just don't hear that talk anymore.
Yeah, you don't, and it's funny because like I did and I'm doing another one coming up soon. Actually, I did a PR course for CCAT for tourism. Just before Christmas, I did one last year as well, and at the start it was hard to win people over to sign up because they see PR as dead and gone, dead and buried. PR is one of the most useful tools you can ever have, and like actually PR works brilliant when it comes to social. The best pieces of PR I had were actually driven by the stuff that was being said online, because if you think about it, nearly all media outlets now have an online presence. So they're looking for stories more than they ever were before. So actually they're starved of information. So if you can give them stuff on a regular basis, they'll cover the most like simple of story. Like you could be opening a new product line. It's actually probably easier to get that stuff out through a small digital publication like maybe Cork Bio, Yay Cork, Echo Live or something like that, than it is actually to try and get a big reach on something like Facebook. And they have regular readers that are clicking on, and of course they have big channels as well, big communities. So, it's about understanding those things as well, the traditional tools. And I'm sure Dave will agree with this. That was one of the things that I think has been missing recently, is there's been too much of a focus on digital, and they're forgetting that the actual fundamentals of marketing are still the same.
I 100% agree with that. And what you say on PR, if someone said it to me, I think it might have been Jonathan Healy, but there's a lot of people, again, like you said, there's almost this kind of myth around PR that, it's old age, it's newspapers and so on and so forth. Like, it's difficult to get stories placed in national newspapers, or international newspapers even harder. And what he kind of said is that if you don't think your story is good enough to end up in a newspaper, or isn't interesting enough to end up in a newspaper, what do you think is going to make it interesting enough for social media? Like, we should be striving for that level of storytelling and that level of content that is really going to engage people. And if you're looking at a piece of content or a campaign, is this actually worth anything? Is this interesting? Is it different? And that's this question that I'd ask you. Is marketing just gone a bit boring and sterile? Because I found myself the last 2 years kind of looking around. There's a few exceptions, Nike being a very, very obvious one. I think Burger King do a great job.
Phenomenal, yeah.
But there's a lot of going around, and I just look at even international big brands, and I'm just going, geez, fuck, this is boring. Like, in a world of Donald Trump and Black Lives Matter and pandemic, all these big, huge global issues, if you talk about attention and all this stuff is going on, if you want to get noticed, you've got to do some pretty exciting stuff. And I haven't seen a huge amount of it recently, to be honest with you. I don't know, is that because people are devoid of ideas, or are people playing it very, very safe because they're afraid, this will go against me in some way, or I could end up getting bad PR and all the rest of it. I'm not sure what it is, but I just find marketing was a creative art, and it's become very, very sterile.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I struggle sometimes to get new cases. I feel like, God, I'm still saying some of the old stuff.
I'm still going back to Dove.
Yeah, Dove is brilliant. Like, some of the old Dove stuff, unbelievable. I often you're talking about companies that have changed the game. Dollar Shave Club, to me, was one of the best ones I saw in years, and then Unilever bought them for $1 billion. But that was in the space of a few years. But they were so innovative with their campaigns in the early days. They built a massive audience of about 3 million subscribers on the back of the CEO kind of being mad, basically. Yeah,
he was a trained comedian, I think it was, actually, as a profession, and he brought that to his video, and of course it makes sense. Like, can you imagine, like we see them the whole time in B2B, right? The talking head video. Can you imagine if he invested the budget that he spent in that in a talking head video, talking about just his blades? That company would be dead today, probably. And instead, $1 billion.
Huge. Yeah, I know it's in the UK and everything. It'll probably be over here too. So, he walked away, I think, from them last year, but which was a pity, because he was still acting CEO, I think, for them under the Unilever brand. But that's just the case there, whereby just by being mad, one of the best. I'm always looking for cases there in relation to TikTok, because it's the new one. So I'm looking for something like, what's different here? Is there anything? I find it's all just individuals and content creators. But I came across a brilliant one, Elf Cosmetics, and I wasn't familiar with the brand, but then it's when you go around to some of chemist and you see their brand in front of it and you say, yeah, no, I know who they are. They did this thing whereby they did they got a couple of people to put out this competition. Eyes, that's what ELF stands for, eyes, lips, face. So it's a beauty cosmetic company. And they wanted people to do a little dance with their face, kind of eyes, lips, face, kind of doing the movement. Then they created a song, a little jingle around it. Clever. And then they got Republic Records involved in it. And they actually made a fucking full song with a music video. They ended up getting, I think, 4.1 million people to make videos using the ELF song. Like, imagine 4.1 million. It turned out like 3 billion impressions on TikTok for the brand, and it had loads of celebrity endorsements as well, and they never paid for any of them. Like, you know, like, to me, that was embracing a platform, you know, like, that was being creative, and I'd love to see more of that stuff. I thought, like, Nike Believe in Something, that campaign with Colin Kaepernick was phenomenal as well. Like, I just thought that was really good. I think for years, until recently, they've been kind of dying off a bit. I think Beats by Dr. Dre were brilliant. They were the ambush kings. Like, you know, they turn up at the Olympics and 10 swimmers will come out to the pool and they'd all have Beats headphones on. You know what I mean? Like, you know, even though they weren't an official brand partner. You know, there's a lot of that stuff missing. People, I think what you're saying is right. People are afraid, or they're just, I think that's what, going back to my anger towards some of the digital advertising, is they're going for the safe bet. They're pumping loads of money into digital spend in terms of targeting people, but they're forgetting that if they put some money into a bit of creative as well, it might go further. You know, people will talk about them. You know, and that's what I'm afraid of. I think some people are missing that. They're basing too much of it on metrics all of the time. What's my reach? I often say this thing, like, it's all about vanity stuff. I've reached 300,000 people. Yeah, but the sanity is how many people actually really watched it. How many people really watched that video? How many just because you pumped it out to 100,000 people and you spent whatever amount of money on it, maybe 10 grand. Did anybody look past 6 seconds? You know, did anybody actually comment underneath? Because that's what I would be focused on. Because that's far more important. You know,
yeah.
So I don't know. I just and the other thing there again, like when we talk about PR and stuff, the amount of people that put all their focus into, for example, Instagram and TikTok, and completely forget that all the journalists are over on Twitter. And never focus on them. And the amount of businesses, I say, you're just missing a trick here. Just building up a relationship alone with the journalists might get you a story. You know, like, you know, just even commenting back, engaging with them. And I've seen phenomenal reach on that platform as well. You know, with simple tweets. And I've seen it, like, I had huge success with PR with Fota in my time there, and the same with Red FM. Like, Twitter is a brilliant tool for going viral, much more so than Instagram ever was. You know, and I found that Facebook back in the day, when people were sharing content, was really strong for going viral. YouTube
I think it's because it's probably less of it's less decision making in Twitter. You retweet a lot quicker, you'll like it a lot quicker than the other platforms. Yeah,
it's easier to do. If you think about Instagram, what you have to do, you have to share it to your story. Will they share everybody's brands to their story? Probably not. And then will everyone?
Plus, I think people, to be fair as well, I think people are a bit more honest on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
I can't scroll through Instagram. It annoys me. A lot of people with filters looking wonderful and marvelous constantly. It just frustrates me. I think a lot of people, even people who use it, don't like using it.
Yeah.
And there's loads of studies about the teen depression, all that kind of stuff. But I just think in general, people scroll through Instagram and just feel like it's all this fudge. And people don't like to show off, right?
Yeah.
And yet that is literally the definition of what Instagram is. Whereas I think with Twitter, is there an element of that? Of course there is. Is there an element of consumer narcissism with all these platforms? But there's at least a smidgen of conversation going on, or a little bit of critical realism that people are more interested in. Now, that's not true to everyone, but I find that TikTok is fun.
What's the fun platform? Yeah.
And that's great. And you go there for fun. If I want serious content, I'm probably going to Netflix. I know it's not a social media platform, but it's content ultimately.
Yeah.
Facebook, I find is boring. And Instagram, I find incredibly frustrating. and then Twitter mainly news and stuff like that. And I think there's like the platforms are becoming more alike, but at the same time they're very, very different still in terms of the types of people and the types of content that you get across each of them.
Yeah, different age profiles, different types of I suppose passions in their life as well. So some people are into politics and media, and they're going to be over on Twitter. People that are into, I suppose, fashion and food and lifestyle type stuff tend to be on Instagram. People are into business related stuff are over on LinkedIn. People are having the crack or on TikTok. You know what I mean? So like, you know, they vary, and some people cross over all different ones. You know, but yeah, it's very interesting, and some people pigeonhole their companies into the stuff that they're into themselves, and they forget about where their audience actually are.
Yeah, it's true. No, that is true. That is true. Speaking of passions, 24 stories, conferences. What's your plan? What are you doing?
Listen, it's been on pause, and I didn't think it would be on pause this long. I never wanted to go online with it. You know, I had this conversation with someone else in the conference business there this week as well. It's 2 years since I did the first one yesterday, and I had a third one booked for last year, and for May, and I was moving it closer to the summer, and then obviously everything was called off, and I said, you know, and I was thinking about going online, and then I've been to online events, and of course I'm teaching all the time, but I felt the whole point of conferences is people mingling with each other.
Agreed, 100%.
And it's not happening online. Anything I've been to online, I've never spoke to anybody else. I feel like I might as well not be there.
Well, I think you're like, we were at the last one that you ran, myself and Dave were at it together. I think yours was slightly different in terms of there was a big focus on that whole networking element. Like you had the tea and coffees, you had the breaks every hour or so. You know, you had the big lunch, which was very unusual to actually sit down and have a lunch, 2 or 3 course, you know, lunch together, which was great. So, and then you have a couple of beers in the bar after.
I remember a few of us having pints with PR Smith there.
That's right,
in the bar. You don't usually have that at conferences where you're kind of having the pint, having the bit of lunch, having a coffee with people all day long.
Yeah,
you know. And somebody said to me that they got somebody I know did a business deal at one of those conferences where there was a couple of grand exchange hands between 2 different companies because they met each other at the coffee break.
Hope you got
that was yourself, Dave Alton, Diageo, was it?
Oh,
yeah, but like, that's not going to happen online. Like, I mean, I had tickets there to the Web Summit last year, and in the end of the day, I actually didn't log on because I was kind of like, even though there was good lineup of speakers there, the fact that I wasn't in the physical place, I forgot about it. Do you know, that kind of a way? It doesn't feel the same, and to me, it feels like you're on YouTube or something, you know, because there's fantastic talks on YouTube. Every speaker that you could ever think of is on YouTube.
Well, I think it's the difference between, like, I mean, and even I finding out, for example, and obviously, like, I'd be very much into sport.
Yeah,
I find it very difficult to watch a match on television, whereas going to an actual match itself, I'd be there with bells on.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Love the whole experience, the camaraderie, the atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, the experiential nature of it. If you're sat in even a bar is different because at least there's an experience associated with that. If you're sitting in front of your laptop or in front of a screen and you're watching something, and it's the same with a conference, you don't have the crack. You're not talking to people about the speakers. There's no questions, the few drinks, the night out afterwards. Oh, this like one of the most enjoyable things about being an academic is you go to academic conferences.
Yeah.
Academic conferences are brilliant because you're meeting like you wouldn't typically meet, unlike I suppose like you'd meet different marketers in Cork the whole time, I suppose, you'd be going down to Republic of Work and your own events and stuff like that. For me, going to academic conferences, you very rarely meet academics outside of your own kind of university, shall we say, or at least your own kind of academic community. The MTU and UCC be pretty close. So the going to those conferences and just meeting some crazy people all together and great stories and stuff like that. That's what you go to them for. Like, you know, as if I just wanted to listen to someone preach about a paper, I just watch it online, you know. It's not the same.
It's not like it was funny because I kind of said it to somebody, put my foot in it there, I think last year, and I said, you know, I won't be bothered. It's like I said, I won't be bothered putting a conference on. And it was a musician I was talking to. I won't name names, but if he's listening to the podcast, you know who I'm talking about straight away. And I said, like, to be honest, like I won't watch a concert online. Like, to be honest, if the truth be told, because it's not that,
I'm guessing he's doing lives every week or something, is he?
Yeah, he was hoping to do it, so that was me. But it's like that. Like, it's different. A TV show is different, like, because obviously that's where we're used to. News is different. That's fine. We're used to all of that kind of stuff. That's why podcasts have grown dramatically, because we're used to listening to radio.
We've seen like, obviously, we got into it as well, but we've seen the rise in the amount of people going into the podcasts over the last couple of months. It's been huge. It really has. Like, even locally, there's so many people doing podcasts now.
Yeah, but in many ways, it's the same as all the people, kind of in its own way, kind of the people that are doing content creation on YouTube or TikTok or wherever. I think not everyone is suited to that world, but some people are suited to a podcast world because they might have, it depends. See, the difference upon podcasts, I think, are long form content.
Yeah. That's
not going to work on a platform like TikTok. Like, it's something that you'll do while you're doing something else. Like I've joked that I've listened to your podcast there and gone around Duns and listened to tea. I'm, putting in the wear at night listening.
That's what we get off few people, between people, just doing the bits around the house on Sunday morning, they're ironing clothes, they're out for their walk. That's most of the people that will comment to us that are listening are doing that. It's not sitting down just consuming the content and doing nothing else.
Someone said that to me actually the last day. We probably need to, and again, it's one of those things that, given the way that we generally operate this podcast, he was in his car with his kids, and I'd say it was you, Doyle, now, to be honest with you, but someone called someone a prick, and his kids were in the back.
Yeah,
and
me.
It was like,
Me.
Yeah.
I'm not quick enough, as we already said, with the bleeper. So.
No, I think there's research done there. 90% of people listen to podcasts on their own anyway. So I think, very few people listened together. So if they are going around Duns at the moment, don't forget to pick up the Velo coffee there for Dave. So.
Oh, good man. That's it, yeah. Good man. Keep it coming. Look, I think there's some great nuggets of information in there, and we really, really appreciate getting you on for episode 20, and thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks a million. I enjoyed it, lads.
Thanks again to everyone for listening. You can follow us across social media, and we'll chat to you again next week. Take care.
Good luck.
There's a good bit in that, isn't it?